There's a candle bearing the names Archie and Lilibet. It's available for purchase. Not some private family memento tucked away at home, but a commercial product sold under the As Ever brand. These children are just 7 and 5 years old. They're not capable of reading contracts, negotiating agreements, understanding intellectual property rights, or providing informed consent. At their ages, they simply cannot meaningfully agree to having their names and royal titles attached to products marketed and sold to the public. Harry, as I've said repeatedly, is hardly the sharpest bunny in the field. More often than not, he speaks before engaging his brain. So when he makes comments like that, especially to an American audience where Elvis remains a cultural icon and a legend among generations of music fans, it comes across as completely absurd. In fact, it almost feels like attention-seeking behavior, as though he's hoping someone will challenge him so he can respond. That candle is where tonight's story begins because it stands as one of the clearest and most documented examples of a pattern that has been developing throughout the Sussex commercial operation for years. We've now reached a point where the evidence is detailed enough to examine closely. The use of Archie and Lilibet, their names, their appearances, their images, and even their royal titles, as branding tools rather than private individuals. Tonight, we'll walk through the documented commercial record, the candle itself, the online shop, the Shop My feature, the registered domain names, the timing patterns, and what Dickie Arbiter and Duncan Larcombe, two figures with decades of experience around the royal family, have observed and publicly commented on. We'll also look at the contradictions surrounding Geneva and examine what child safety experts have said regarding the argument that obscuring a child's face somehow addresses concerns about privacy and exploitation. By the end of this discussion, you'll have a complete picture of what the documented evidence actually shows, separate from interpretations offered by either side of the debate. Let's begin with the commercial record, because the documented examples are far more specific than the broader public argument often acknowledges. At one stage, Meghan had the Shop My feature activated on her Instagram account. This feature allows followers to click directly on items featured in posts and purchase them. Clothing worn by the children appeared in posts while this shopping function was active, meaning viewers could see the children, click the linked products they were wearing, and buy them directly. Every purchase generated revenue for Meghan. Meghan Markle seems unable to grasp a simple point. If she intends to position herself as a leading voice on internet safety, then the first place those principles should be visible is on her own Instagram account. Yet that's precisely where she refuses to apply them. She appears determined to monetize virtually everything, and it's difficult to avoid the conclusion that she understands perfectly well that posts featuring her children tend to generate stronger engagement. In those posts, the children effectively served as product placement vehicles attached to direct commercial transactions. That's not speculation or interpretation, it's simply a description of how the feature functioned and how it was used in publicly available posts. After criticism mounted, the feature was eventually removed. But removing a feature doesn't erase the broader pattern it represented. The underlying approach, using the presence of the children to support commercial outcomes, continued through other methods long after the feature disappeared. The candle remains the most striking example because it relies on names rather than photographs, and names are more difficult to explain away. A photograph can be presented as spontaneous or incidental. A product carrying a child's name is the result of a deliberate commercial decision. The As Ever candle featuring the names Archie and Lilibet is a product directly connected to the identities of two children aged 7 and 5. Supporters argue that it's simply part of a family project designed to make the children feel involved, but that explanation raises an important question. At what point does involving a child in a family business stop being inclusion and start becoming something they are too young to understand or consent to? A 5-year-old can enjoy helping in the kitchen and feel included in family activities. What they cannot do is provide meaningful consent for their name to be attached to a commercial product. This is, frankly, yet another example of what many see as blatant hypocrisy. Meghan travels to places like Geneva to discuss child safety online, then only days later releases images of her own children. Whether their faces are visible is beside the point. The reality is that those images are being used to strengthen and promote her brand while simultaneously telling everyone else to be cautious about involving their own children online. I simply don't accept the explanation coming from her representatives. To me, it looks like pure hypocrisy. The domain names add yet another layer to the discussion. The Sussex household registered domain names connected to their children long before the children were even old enough to attend school. Registering a domain name is a commercial decision with a clear purpose. You secure a domain because you anticipate future value and want to control it before someone else does. When commercial domains are registered for children who haven't even started school, that decision is being made by adults for reasons that appear commercial rather than purely protective or parental. If Hollywood Today is bringing you the details and context that many other channels leave out, consider hitting the like button. It costs nothing, and it helps keep the channel going. Now, let's turn to Dickie Arbiter, because his perspective carries weight that few commentators can match, and the language he uses here is particularly important. Arbiter spent 5 years working closely alongside Princess Diana as her press secretary. During that time, he managed her public engagements, handled communications through one of the most heavily scrutinized periods any royal has experienced, and stood beside her through some of the most important and challenging moments of that era, both behind the scenes and in public view. If you're genuinely concerned about preserving your children's anonymity, then don't photograph them and upload those images online. And if you do want to take photographs, keep them in a family album, save them on your phone, store them on your computer, but don't publish them online. You cannot put images on the internet and then expect anonymity, because that's simply not how it works. Arbiter was there when William and Harry were born. He witnessed firsthand how Diana approached the challenge of raising children under constant public scrutiny and institutional pressure. Her philosophy regarding her sons was clear and practical rather than theoretical. She wanted them to experience as normal a childhood as possible. The trips to theme parks, the visits to fast food restaurants, and the outings to ordinary places far removed from palace life were not random activities. They were intentional decisions. Even while the spotlight relentlessly followed her own life and personal struggles, Diana consistently made protecting her children's privacy a priority. The results of that approach were visible. The warmth, relatability, and ease that William and Harry later brought into public life didn't emerge by accident. They came from being allowed to enjoy childhood before being expected to fulfill public roles. Meghan and Harry control their children's names. They control the domain registrations. They control the email addresses. They control every associated asset. When Archewell Foundation transitioned into Archewell Philanthropies, the explanation offered was that it would allow their children to be involved as part of a broader family vision. Arbiter's assessment of what he sees today is striking because of the specific word he chooses. He doesn't say carelessly. He doesn't say it unintentionally or by accident. The word he uses is ruthlessly. That choice of language matters. Coming from someone with his experience and background, it carries weight far beyond the usual tabloid commentary. It reflects an opinion formed through years of observing what responsible protection of royal children looks like and comparing it with what he believes is happening now. This is not the same as criticism coming from social media commentators or newspaper columnists. Arbiter isn't an outsider speculating from a distance. He's someone who helped shape and implement an alternative model. He understands firsthand what it looks like in practice, and he is saying directly that the current approach bears little resemblance to that model in ways he finds deeply troubling. Duncan Larcombe approaches the issue from a different perspective. Having covered the royal family for decades and known Harry personally, his focus is on timing. According to Larcombe, the children's appearances in public content seem to follow a pattern that doesn't resemble spontaneous family sharing. She'll use her children ruthlessly, just as she has, in his view, used her husband and the royal family to strengthen her brand, shape her image, and reinforce her version of events. The appearances tend to increase after periods of negative publicity. They show up around commercial launches. They frequently align with key moments in the brand cycle. When the A's Ever brand has required an extra layer of warmth and emotional appeal beyond simple product photography, the children have appeared in domestic family settings. When negative press coverage has needed a softer counterbalance, birthday tributes and family-centered content have surfaced. When Harry received positive solo coverage that did not include Meghan, she posted content featuring their daughter within hours. No individual example is enough on its own to prove a deliberate strategy. However, when similar examples repeat across several years, multiple commercial campaigns, and numerous media cycles, coincidence becomes a more difficult explanation to accept. Larcombe describes the pattern as looking less like a family photo album and more like a content calendar. That observation comes from someone who has spent decades watching how both celebrity and royal media strategies operate. His argument is that what he's seeing aligns far more closely with strategic content planning than with spontaneous family sharing. Subscribe to Hollywood Today so you never miss our next deep dive, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Where, in your view, is the line between sharing family moments and using them as part of a commercial strategy? Duncan Larcombe, who has spent decades covering this family and has met Harry personally, arrives at a similar conclusion from another angle. His focus remains on timing. He argues that the children's appearances in public content follow a recognizable pattern. They become more frequent after unfavorable press coverage. They appear around product launches and key commercial moments. They arrive at points that seem strategically beneficial to the broader brand. That doesn't resemble the behavior of a parent casually sharing family memories. It resembles a content strategy. The examples are specific. When the A's Ever brand has needed emotional authenticity, the children have appeared in home and kitchen settings where their presence adds warmth that product-focused content alone cannot achieve. When criticism has needed to be softened, family moments and birthday tributes have appeared. And when Harry received recognition from Time magazine without Meghan being part of the story, Meghan reportedly posted a photograph featuring their daughter on Instagram within hours. No individual example taken on its own proves the existence of a deliberate strategy. But context matters. Growing up, Meghan dreamed of Hollywood success, of being a major figure on a major stage. Harry, by contrast, spent much of his childhood wishing for the exact opposite. He longed for anonymity. He wanted a life where he wasn't instantly recognized wherever he went. The uncomfortable reality, as Duncan Larcombe sees it, is this. Meghan is living the life she always imagined, while Harry is living the life he spent years trying to escape. Looking at a single incident may not tell us much. Looking at a pattern that repeats across multiple years, multiple commercial projects, and multiple media cycles is far more difficult to dismiss as mere coincidence. Now let's focus specifically on the Geneva aspect of this discussion, because the contrast between the speech delivered there and the public posting record has become one of the most visible and frequently debated elements of the broader story. Meghan's appearance in Geneva centered on protecting children from the dangers associated with algorithm-driven online environments. She spoke about how platforms are designed to maximize engagement, how recommendation systems can create endless feedback loops, and how children's presence online can be commercially exploited by systems built around capturing attention. The speech itself was polished and well-delivered. The concerns it highlighted are legitimate. Both of those things can be true at the same time. Online child safety is a serious public policy issue, and the Geneva stage was entirely appropriate for raising those concerns. The criticism isn't about whether the cause matters. The criticism centers on whether the person advocating those principles applies them consistently in their own actions, and whether that consistency affects the credibility of the message. Supporters of Meghan's approach argue that the children are protected because their faces are either obscured or only partially shown in public content. According to that argument, the privacy principle is still being respected. Child safety experts who have examined this issue have challenged that reasoning on two specific fronts. The first is that hiding a face does not eliminate a child's online presence or prevent the creation of a digital footprint. If a child's birthday is publicly discussed, if details of their home environment appear online, if they repeatedly appear throughout a parent's commercial content cycle, if their name is attached to products available for sale, and if clothing they wear is linked to purchase opportunities, then that child is not functionally private, regardless of whether their face is fully visible. The risk Meghan described in Geneva was never primarily about facial recognition technology. The concern was about something broader, the gradual construction of a public identity around someone who never chose to have one. A partially obscured face does not stop that process from happening. The second point raised by child safety professionals is more surprising but equally important. Some experts argue that partial visibility can, in certain circumstances, attract more attention rather than less. Images showing a child from behind, with facial features hidden or only partly visible, can sometimes create curiosity and encourage a particular type of unwanted attention. The element of mystery, for certain audiences, may function as an attraction rather than a deterrent. Because of this, the idea that hiding a face automatically guarantees privacy protection is not universally supported by child safety research. Some experts have specifically referenced concerns that mirror the approach seen in Sussex-related content. This leads directly into the issue of consent. Whether we're discussing the candle, the domain registrations, shopping links, or the use of names and titles, all of these decisions involve children who are too young to provide meaningful consent regarding the commercial use of their identities. Many legal systems have established protections around the commercial use of minors' names, images, and likenesses for precisely this reason. Children generally lack both the legal authority and cognitive maturity required to understand the long-term consequences of such decisions. That is why safeguards and oversight mechanisms exist. Whether the Sussexes' specific decisions fall inside or outside those legal boundaries is ultimately a question for legal experts. But the fact that the issue can reasonably be raised and has not been publicly clarified is notable in itself. Larcombe's observations regarding Harry's role in all of this are perhaps the most uncomfortable aspect of the discussion. A significant portion of Harry's public identity has been built around concerns about privacy, exploitation, and media intrusion. For years, he has been one of the most outspoken critics of the commercialization of private lives. He has repeatedly condemned press intrusion into family life, spoken about the dangers of exploiting children for public consumption, and criticized institutions he believes prioritized reputation over individual well-being, including his own experiences as a child. These aren't passing opinions. They form the foundation of much of his public advocacy. His memoir, his legal battles, and numerous interviews all rest on clearly stated beliefs about privacy, protecting children from exploitation, and holding accountable those who profit from the exposure of people who never consented to it. Yet despite those principles, the candle remains on sale. The domain names remain registered. The Shop My feature existed and operated publicly, and the timing pattern that Larcombe describes as resembling a content calendar remains visible to anyone examining the public record. Importantly, Larcombe is not arguing that Harry is enthusiastically orchestrating every aspect of this process. His argument is not that Harry is actively pushing every aspect of this strategy. His point is that Harry is allowing it to happen, and if someone truly holds the beliefs Harry has repeatedly expressed about privacy, exploitation, and the protection of children not as a public performance, but as deeply held principles, then many would expect him to establish a clear and visible boundary. Critics argue that boundary has yet to appear. It's an uncomfortable observation, but it's also a fair one in a specific sense. A person's convictions regarding the exploitation of children are tested most meaningfully when those convictions come into conflict with commercial opportunities involving their own family. It's worth speaking plainly about the commercial logic underpinning the Sussex operation because it helps explain the incentives at work regardless of what any individual decision was intended to accomplish. Meghan's most successful commercial projects have consistently been those most directly tied to the royal connection. The Harry and Meghan Netflix documentary generated 81.6 million viewing hours during its first week because audiences were interested in a royal story, the departure, the institution, the conflict, and the fallout surrounding it. Projects that have moved away from that royal connection have generally performed at a significantly lower level, something reflected by the viewing figures associated with the 2025 cooking series. Within that context, Archie and Lilibet represent the most personal and enduring connection to the royal institution that remains available to the Sussex brand. They are the children of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Archie remains seventh in the line of succession. Lilibet carries a name closely associated with the late Queen. They are not simply children in the way most children are viewed publicly. They also represent an ongoing and permanent link to an institution that remains central to the Sussex commercial identity. That reality alone does not prove deliberate exploitation. What it does demonstrate is that the incentive structure naturally encourages greater visibility rather than less. The commercial pressure points in that direction regardless of the motivations behind any individual post or decision. Whether those incentives are consciously being followed or whether they simply exert influence as the easiest available path is something only the people making those choices can answer. What outside observers can examine is the outcome. That outcome is the pattern that Arbiter describes using the word ruthlessly, and that Larcombe characterizes as a content calendar rather than a family photo album. The comparison to Diana matters not because of sentimentality, but because it offers a practical framework. Diana's approach produced results that remain visible decades later. Her sons grew into adults who were widely viewed as relatable, approachable, and grounded. That outcome wasn't accidental, nor was it the product of luck. It came from a deliberate effort to keep them ordinary, private, and human first, while they were young enough for that protection to shape their development before public expectations could do so. The current approach differs in ways that can be documented and examined. The issue isn't that family moments are being shared. Diana shared family moments throughout William and Harry's childhood, and no serious observer disputes that fact. The distinction, critics argue, is that today's family moments are often connected to a broader commercial infrastructure in ways Diana's were not. Additionally, the children's names, titles, and identities have been registered and incorporated into branding structures in ways that extend beyond simple family sharing and move into a category with very different implications. The timing pattern Larcombe describes as resembling a content calendar can be observed across enough examples that it becomes worth examining specifically rather than discussing in broad terms. When commercial launches have required momentum, family-oriented content has appeared. When negative headlines have needed a softer counterbalance, birthday messages and domestic family glimpses have followed. When financial challenges involving the Archwell Foundation entered public discussion, the children appeared in promotional video material in ways previous Sussex content had generally avoided. When Harry received favorable solo coverage from Time magazine that did not mention Meghan reportedly posted content featuring their daughter alongside a romantic image of herself and Harry within hours. Defenders of this pattern argue that parents naturally share moments involving their children, that timing overlaps happen by chance, and that assuming a calculated strategy behind every post is unfair. Those are legitimate counter-arguments. The challenge, however, is that the pattern repeats often enough that coincidence becomes a more difficult explanation to sustain. 4 examples of the same correlation may simply be chance. 10 examples spread across multiple years become harder to dismiss as random and easier to recognize as a recurring pattern. Larcombe's content calendar description ultimately expresses the same idea in different language. If children's appearances consistently coincide with commercial launches, reputation management cycles, or moments when one partner receives independent media attention, and if those appearances become more frequent as other aspects of the brand struggle to generate engagement, then what you're observing begins to resemble the behavior of a strategic content schedule. The question isn't whether that characterization sounds harsh. The real question is whether that description is accurate. Let's bring all of these pieces together, because beneath every individual example sits one central question. The debate is not about whether parents are allowed to share photographs of their children. Of course they are, and nobody making this argument is claiming otherwise. The debate is not about whether these children are loved. They clearly are. Nor is it about whether Meghan genuinely cares about child safety online. It's entirely possible that she sincerely believes in those principles, while also engaging in practices that critics view as commercial use of her children's identities. Those two realities are not mutually exclusive. One does not automatically cancel out the other. The actual question is whether the documented use of these particular children, their names appearing on products, their images being connected to shopping opportunities, their titles being incorporated into domain registrations, and their appearances occurring at key moments within the brand's commercial cycle represents something fundamentally different from ordinary family sharing. And beyond that, whether a public advocate for child digital safety weakens their own message when experts and critics identify a documented pattern that appears inconsistent with the principles being promoted. When there is a visible gap between stated values and observable behavior, advocacy can lose credibility. And when credibility weakens, effectiveness often follows. This isn't primarily an issue for Meghan's personal reputation as a public figure. The larger concern is what it means for the cause itself. Child digital safety is a serious and increasingly urgent issue. It requires advocates who can speak with sustained credibility to lawmakers, technology companies, educators, and parents. When one of the most recognizable public faces associated with that cause becomes the subject of detailed and documented criticism regarding their own practices, it becomes easier for opponents and industry figures to dismiss the broader message. That, ultimately, appears to be the concern Arbiter is expressing when he uses the word ruthlessly. And it's the same concern Larcombe is describing when he frames the pattern as a content calendar. Both men arrive at the issue from different backgrounds and experiences, yet they are pointing toward the same underlying observation. Their argument is that the children's presence within the Sussex commercial operation is not incidental, it is structural. The pattern runs through the candle, through the domain registrations, through the shop my links, and through the timing of the content itself. Whether that crosses a line is something each individual viewer must decide for themselves after reviewing the full record. People place that line in different places. Those who defend the Sussex approach, and those who criticize it, are both operating from what they believe to be a reasonable understanding of where the boundaries should be. The goal of this discussion has not been to make that judgment on your behalf. The goal has been to present the documented material that allows you to make your own judgment. The candle, the domain registrations, the shop my features, the timing patterns, and the observations of people with first-hand professional experience of what a different model of child privacy and public life can look like. Even the Newsweek response serves as part of the broader picture. If the tension between the Geneva speech and the subsequent posting pattern had felt entirely comfortable and uncontroversial, there would have been little need for a carefully prepared, lawyer-reviewed response. The fact that such a response was considered necessary suggests an awareness, however indirect, that the contradiction was expected to draw scrutiny. And then, just 18 days after the Geneva speech, the birthday photograph of Lilibet was posted. The cycle continued. Now we'd like to hear your perspective. Where do you personally draw the line between sharing family moments and commercial deployment? And after looking at the documented record discussed here, has your view of that line changed at all? Subscribe to Hollywood Today so you don't miss our next analysis. And if you appreciate detailed, evidence-focused coverage rather than broad generalizations, the like button is one of the simplest ways to support the channel and help us continue producing this kind of in-depth reporting.